Dear God, I am ready for your help in removing from me the defects of character, which I now realise are an obstacle to my recovery. Help me to continue being honest with myself and guide me towards spiritual and mental health. Amen. Okay, it's with much love and gratitude that the group welcomes Cameron F. to come and share with us. Cameron, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Purdy. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. My name's Cameron. I'm a member of Cocaine Anonymous, alcoholic addict who doesn't drink or use. You know, that opening you were talking about, Purdy, where says many of us shared the same stories. In the CA literature, when I first heard it, they said many of us have shared the same horrors. And I thought, many of us shared the same horrors? I thought they said horrors, not horrors, but, you know. Anyhow. I much prefer that. Many of us had shared the same horrors. I know that sounds misogynistic and bigoted and all that sort of stuff, but hey, that's one of my character defects that I continue to work on. And those of you who know me a little more up close and personal, I am no saint. I'm just a dickweed like everybody else, working a program, trying to cleave to a power greater than myself so I don't end up poking a needle in my arm and shooting up, you know, more cocaine and drinking more bourbon and destroying everyone and everything I come into contact with. To get the 6 and 7, I got to set the foundation to why we need a 6 and 7 and what is the dynamic that goes on in a step 6 and 7. So to briefly qualify, so you don't realize, you know, I just kind of wandered in on this channel because I'm lonely and I need to talk. I feel like Bill Nighy from Love Actually. Remember when they kept playing a song, Christmas is All Around Us? He goes, oh, not that bloody shite again. That's what I feel as a speaker. I've done so many shares in the UK. It's, oh, not that bloody guy again. But anyhow, I sobered up on November 21st, 2003. Now, I'd stopped everything on October 30th, 2003. I gave up coffee, I gave up cigarettes, I gave up drinking, and I gave up drugs all on the same day. That was October 30th, yet my sobriety date is November 21st. And what happened is on November 20th, one of my friends invited me to the food show here in Toronto, and they had beers from around the world. I went, oh, that doesn't sound good. But they were giving you little licks of beer in a communion cup. You ever seen a communion cup? Like it's so small. And they would only fill it up maybe half at best. You know, it's like a sip of beer. And I thought, well, that can't interfere with my sobriety. But, you know, when you drink like 400 of them, so my sobriety date is November 21st, 2003. I dried out in sobriety, as I call it, in a lot of those what I call open disgusting meetings where there's no solution. Just a lot of, you know, group therapy without a therapist and problem. Everyone seems to think a problem shared is a problem halved. And I slowly went insane over 8 months. And, I remember it was 8 months in and that there was a step 4 discussion and I was asked to share and I shared some awful stuff. Whatever was on my mind, it was heinous, it was vile, and I thoroughly vomited all over that group. And at the end of the share, nobody said anything. And as I'm walking, I'm thinking, is this what recovery looks like? White knuckling just for today. God, please don't let me drink or use. I couldn't do it. I was going out to drink and a guy grabbed me and he said, Cameron, I'm watching you die. Let me show you how to work a program. And we didn't go to another meeting. We went to a coffee shop with 2 big books, opened it up and started working the instructions. By the way, whenever I get a call from a panicked prospect and they're desperate, they're crazy, they're thinking of going out, my standard advice is take 2 big books, 1 newcomer, call me in the morning. That's always the solution. So he took me, we went through the steps and, you know, we were mucking up our books, circling words, making notes, having discussions. And I had that profound alteration in my reaction to life. And then a lot of things started to happen for me as I carried this message to those that still suffered. But to qualify, you know, step one is what motivates us to do the work. Without a strong foundation in step 1, most are not motivated. I think the whole planet could benefit by being indoctrinated into a 12-step program. And imagine how our societies would work if we were to cleave to the 12 traditions as our way of interacting with one another. It'd be a pretty phenomenal society, in my opinion. Most won't do it because the step one really isn't painful enough to do it. It says in our book, most of us have to be pretty badly mangled before we commence to solve our problems. We had to be beaten into a state of reasonableness. Part of the problem is I love drinking and using, because drinking and using is my solution to what ails me, that general state of restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed, anxious. And I don't think anyone likes to feel that way. It's an awful way to live life, especially if you're in the pursuit of happiness and there is no happiness and I'm chasing one whim after another. And then I discovered alcohol when I was 20 years of age, and my first drink was a rum and coke. I had this rum and coke. I drank it with my buddies at college where I was alone. I was awkward. I was immature, didn't know how to talk to people. And when I drank the rum and coke, oh my God, this Cameron came out. I really liked this guy. And everyone else seemed to like him. And then about 20 rum and cokes later, and ethereal, the projectile vomiting and the bed spins and the hangover. Oh my God, I can't go on like this. I don't want to ever do that again. But where am I? 3 days later, back at pub night, slinging back the rum and cokes. And then I discovered drugs. And I went, oh my God, this is even better. I don't get the debilitating effects of the alcohol. And I engaged in drugs. And it took, that was in 1977. By 1982, I hit my first bottom. That was just my first bottom. I had many more bottoms after that. But in 1982, I hit my first bottom, and I sobered up for a week. I moved back to my parents' house at 25. Bad move. And, it was a city outside the city I was living in. Well, I was very disappointed to find out that my old hometown had bars and drug dealers. So I sobered up for like a week, and then I'm back at it. And then I hit many more bottoms after that. The illness progresses. In the beginning, I could take it or leave it alone. I always like to overindulge in it, but there were times when I could say, no, I'm not doing it in the early days, right? Because it solved my problem. I didn't feel restless, irritable, discontented, or depressed. The alcohol solved my problem. And I really liked that. And in the beginning, it was like, oh my God, why would I want to be any way different, right? It was like a warm hug, an old friend coming to visit every time. But the illness rolls out and becomes more and more problematic. So midterm into my drinking and using, it's problems with a lot of fun. But in the end, it was nothing but problems. I was being mangled by it. And there came a point when I really wanted to stop. I didn't want to go on. I'd stopped before. The first time I tried to sober up, I got a year. Second time I tried to sober up, I got 9 months. I was like a 5-year guy, 5-year binger. And I sobered up. I sobered up for 9 months when my wife got cancer. But I wasn't working a program. 9 months later, my client I did some work with said, you did a great job, Cameron. Let me buy you a drink. It doesn't agree with me. Come on, one drink. Well, I'm not working a program, so my brain starts kicking in, that liar that lives in my head that wants to convince me somehow, some way I should be able to control and enjoy my drinking and using. I thought, what's one bourbon? But long after I've drank the bourbon, he's drank his, and he's gone. I'm still at the bar drinking, and now I'm on the phone calling the dealer, and all hell is breaking loose. I had my first blackout very, very late in my drinking career, and it scared the hell out of me. I'd done a lot of drugs and a lot of drinking, and I'd never, ever lost cognitive contact with what I was doing. And I remember waking up from this blackout and these ghostly images of horrendous things I'd done the night before. It scared the hell out of me. I sobered up for 9 months. But what happened sobered up for 3 months. And then after 3 months, the memory faded. And then the liar says, hey, I think we're good to go again. I always say when my mind and body starts to heal, that liar returns in my head and says, hey, we need our solution. It's time to go drinking and using. And of course, the problem is the liar would always win the argument. And down, down, down I went, destroying everything and everyone. I call it powerlessness I got my step one understanding the powerlessness, which was nothing secular, nothing human, nothing psychological was going to be enough power to keep me permanently sober. I could sober up for a bit. Like I said, then the liar returns and convinces me to go back out. I needed permanent sobriety. I had liver disease. I destroyed my family. I had destroyed my relationship with my children. My clients wanted nothing to do with me. It was a real mess. And I really, really wanted to stop. But I couldn't stay stopped. Somehow, some way, I would pick up the drink, the drug. You know, my wife's a JDD girl. Just don't drink, just don't drug, Cameron, which is really the solution. But for some reason, I can't seem to implement that in my life. And I'd always return to it. One of my favorite analogies is I'm like a dog that returns to its own vomit. I couldn't use some of the more graphic things that we can sometimes get away with in CA. But when I speak in AA, you can't cuss in AA. They get really wound up. So I started using this analogy of I'm like a dog that returns to its own vomit as an untreated alcoholic addict. And it's really bizarre to anyone who doesn't suffer what we suffer. They look at that and think, what is going on with this person? But those of you that are like me understand that dilemma. Somehow, some way, my liar convinces me this time when I eat the vomit, it's going to be good and I'm going to be okay. And then, of course, I throw it up. And like a dog, I return to the vomit, eat it again, and so on. So my step one, and that was the powerlessness, but it was the second part of step one that drove me to seek a solution. I came into the rooms mangled, came into the rooms beaten up, but that's not what drove me into the rooms was the powerlessness. Because people would say, are you an addict, Cameron? I go, you're bloody right, I'm an addict. Let's go get high. Let's go get drunk. It was the second part, the losing trajectory I was on, pursuing my love of drinking and using to the gates of insanity and death. And you all think of what you're willing to risk for that amazing effect we get when we drink and we use. I worshiped the God of alcohol for 26 years, from the age of 20 to the age of 46. I worshiped the God of cocaine for the same amount of time, the God of marijuana, the God of LSD, the God of mushrooms, the God of pills. I worshiped these gods and consumed their sacraments daily. But there came a day when I wanted to renounce all that, and I couldn't. I couldn't break it. And that's the horror of step one. It always ends in death or suicide. You know, those people that are unfortunately in those open discussing rooms often commit suicide because they can't live with it. They don't know how to live without it. And they're not getting the solution in the rooms, not like this room where, you know, you guys offer up a solution every Wednesday. They're not getting it, and they slowly go insane, and they end up taking their own lives. Suicide rates in 12 steps is 80 times higher than normal society. And it's a real problem. I've buried 9 people who have committed suicide in sobriety. I've buried 37 to overdoses. You know, mostly the opiates and alcohol are the big killers. Occasionally a crackhead will die, but they're like cockroaches, right? They just scurry about their communities, causing all sorts of mayhem, right? They're really wretched creatures, crackheads. But the alcohol and the fentanyl are the big killers. And I bury more people to alcohol death than anything else. 9 committed suicide and 2 were murdered. And that's kind of the MO. I've worked with 48 people that are dead. Now, I've worked over the years I've taken over 14,000 people through the 12 steps in 4 hours. I see my friend Camilla is on the channel with us today. Camilla is actually going to be emceeing the next 12 steps, 4 hours workshop on May 25th. I'm in Phoenix for the World Convention. Anyone else going to the World Convention in a couple of weeks? Should be a hell of a good time in Phoenix. I love Phoenix. I think I could live in Phoenix. It's hot. It's dry. And I can go to the desert and catch rattlesnakes. Oh my God, it's so much fun. Tarantulas, scorpions. And I get to occasionally see the really dangerous creatures, which are crackheads and drug addicts and alcoholics. So my step one, it was that losing streak that motivated me to seek the solution. I knew I was going to die. I could see the gates of insanity or death. So when this fellow approached me, he asked me, first of all, he qualified. He said, you know, do you have the essentials of recovery in place. I said, well, what does that mean? He says, are you willing? Well, what do you mean by that? Are you willing to show up and do the work? Yeah, I'm willing to show up and do the work. Show me how to do it. Can you be honest with me? Can you answer a simple yes or no? And I said, yes, I can do that. And they said, can you be open-minded? Can you lay aside, as you said in the set aside prayer, lay aside your prejudices, experience the program, and judge for yourself the results. A good friend of mine used to describe open-mindedness as when you don't know, when I know I don't know, then I know I'm ready to know, which I always thought was a pretty fun way of looking at open-mindedness. I said, I've got those. I can do that. Yes, I can do that. He said, great. Now, the first thing he said to me was, you're going to be a sponsor. And I wanted to reiterate that because sponsorship is the whole point. Our job as sponsors, or what I like to affectionately refer to us as spiritual pimps, because that's what we do. We make introductions. Hey, God, here's a dickweed, here's God. That's what we do. We don't carry the addict or the alcoholic. We don't carry them. We don't play junior counselor or junior marriage counselor or lawyer or therapist or doctor. That's not what we do. We show them how to broker a relationship with the one who's got all the power so that they can light up and connect the way we've connected, cleave to a power far greater than ourselves that lets us easily control that desire to drink, use, or if you suffer the acting out, addictions, the acting out, stuff like sex, love, food, gambling, whatever. That's our job. Get the newcomer through the 12 steps as quickly as possible so they can enjoy that power that lets them easily control their desire to drink or use. So, we immediately launched in. Now, when I first met my sponsor, I said, what happened to you? Because I knew what a horrible pill popper he was, what a horrible drunk he was. He was a real low bottom alcoholic. And like Ebby Thatcher, there he is, fresh skinned and glowing. And he said, I found God. And I went, oh God, not that. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. But I was convinced that he had found something. There was a profound alteration in his reaction to life, and I wanted that. So, he set me up with step 2, which is coming to believe in a power greater than ourselves. Lack of power, that's my dilemma. Where do I find the power? And our book is very specific on its instructions. It says you find the power deep down within us. That's another paradox, right? I need a power greater than the God of alcohol, greater than the God of cocaine, greater than the God of marijuana and benzos and whatever. I gotta get a God that's more powerful than that. Well, where do I find it? Well, I find it deep down within myself. That's really a paradoxical thing to say, but it's only there that it can be found. In the last analysis, it's only there, deep down within us. So our process of the 12 steps, it's a process that allows us to wake up to that power, to crawl out of our slumber as barely toilet-trained apes, where we're eating and defecating and fornicating. That's about all they really do, right? They're like reptilian brain-oriented entities, fight and flight, eating, defecating, fornicating. But this program wakes us up. We wake up, we come to a higher consciousness, and we become aware of this power within ourselves. Get a little kind of a taste of it as we start the journey into these steps. And if you're having trouble with the God concept, I always say smoke more crack. Come back when you're ready. But I've worked with Jews, I've worked with Christians, I've worked with Muslims, I've worked with Buddhists, I've worked with atheists, I've worked with agnostics, I've worked with all kinds of people at different stages of the willingness to believe in a power greater than themselves. With atheists and agnostics, I use the idea of higher consciousness. I just redid a workbook for a Christian group where I removed God and just substitute Jesus in it, because that's the way they construct their higher power is coming to grips with Jesus. And if I'm working with a Christian, I'll call it Jesus. I just got finished working with a Hindu, and we were doing Ganesha. So I thought that was pretty neat. I don't care what name you put to it. All I know is if you're looking for it deep down within yourself, you're looking in the right spot. And so we let the testimony of others bear witness. You take a look at Katie, you take a look at Purdy or Francine, or some of you others that are self-admitted addicts who don't do it anymore. Let your testimony bear witness to this power at play. And then the ability to be honest with yourself and to search diligently within yourself. And you can come join us on this broad highway. And then we move to step 3, which is, okay, I believe there's power out there. There's a phenomena of power happening, and I see it working with others. How do I get a piece of the action? And so I'm required to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to God as I understand it. And the question is, what do we mean by that? What do we do? Well, step 3 simply is, I got to turn my will over. That means I got to turn my thinking over. And why do I got to turn my thinking over to a higher consciousness? Because who's running my brain right now as an untreated addict? The liar. And the liar's going to win the argument. So I got to fire the liar, and I got to hire this God, this higher consciousness, and take direction from it. And the second part is to turn my life over. That means I'm going to turn my behavior over to the care of God as I understand it. And that's really the nut of step 3. I'm going to abandon Cameron utterly, no half measures. That should be a slogan in our rooms. Half measures avail us nothing. The other one should be faith without works is dead. Those are 2 really good, powerful messages of our program. So I'm going to turn my behavior over to the care of God as I understand it. I'm going to do God's will. Cameron, as CEO of Cameron Inc., you know, my directors got together and said, Cameron, you're an awful director. We're bankrupt physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You're an awful director. And we got this new director, calls himself God. He's omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. We think he's the guy for the job. So Cameron, you're fired and God's hired. That's what's going on in step 3. And of course, that's predicated on your step 1, because that's what's motivating me to do this wild thing called the 12 step, is being on the premises of the gates of insanity and death. And I don't want to go any further. I do not want to plunge into the abyss. So I'm ready to go a different way, to utterly abandon myself, to be of maximum service to God and my fellow human beings. And step 3 is what separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls. This is when we really decide, am I going to be a member of a 12-step program? Am I really going a different way? Not Cameron's way, but God's way. You know, and the price that we pay is the destruction of self-centeredness. And that's a hell of a price to pay for a self-centered prick of 46 years to suddenly renounce all that and go a different way. So step 3 is like my daily baptism. I don't need to do 1 and 2 again. You know, I just look at my list of failed strategies under human power and all the things I've lost in my addiction. That pretty much convinces me of who and what I am. And step 2, my willingness to believe. Now, I'm very protective of my faith. I come into the rooms like this to meet people like Purdy and Katie and Francine and so on, because it reinforces the powers at work. And that reinforcement, that testimony that there is power at play, that gives me the motivation to continue doing the work of the 12 steps. And as a result of doing the 12 steps, I have the spiritual experiences. The promises are your benchmarks that tell you whether or not you're having a spiritual experience. That's the epistemology. That's how we know we've been anointed by the power, is we experience the promises of step 3, step 5, step 9, step 10, step 11, and step 12. That's your epistemology that tells you you're having a spiritual experience. So step 3 is my daily baptism, and I start my day with step 3 every morning. God, I'm going to go your way. And then I meditate. What do I got to do today? And what will God's will look like under that demonstration? And then I execute my day. The promise is that by cleaving to a power greater than myself and doing its will, I will be able to tap a power that lets me easily control my desire to drink, use, or act out. That's the key. It's not about quitting, because if you understand step 1, I can't quit. I will drink and I will use again, yet it's been 21 years since I've any desire to drink or use, or if it does pop up, I can very easily control that desire. That's the key of this program. To find that power. 12 steps is our recipe for that power. The New Testament is how the Christians do it. The Quran is how the Muslims do it. Torah is how the Jews do it. The Autogranti is how the Sikhs do it, and so on. There are formulas for cleaving to this power. We got a pretty simple way of doing it, which is 12 simple steps to connect to this power and easily control our desire to drink or use. Now, the first time I tried to implement this way of living, like, oh my God, when I started meditating, the chatter in my head and all those, that guilt and shame and the remorse and the resentments, oh my God, the anger and the hatred. And I couldn't find that spark of the divine. So 4 and 5 is a process where we get right with ourselves. We look at our resentments, we look at our fears, and we look at the harms we've done to other people, and we tease out our moral inventory. Remember, a 12-step program is a spiritual moral approach to the efficacy of our addiction. So I tease out those character defects, those flaws in my makeup, those impediments that prevent me from connecting to this divine power deep down within me. Now, the magic of step 4 and 5 is when you uncover the defect where there's no power. For example, one of my big defects is hatred. And I realized through all the destroyed relationships in my inventory, on my resentments, on my fears, and on my harms, nothing good was coming out of hatred. There was no power in it. It just made me angry, and then I suffered its symptoms. I got restless and irritable and discontented and bored and depressed, and that activated the liar. The liar came out of remission and said, hey, Cameron, we need our solution, and the liar's going to win the argument, and out I go again, pursuing my love of drinking and using to the gates of insanity or death. But when I understand what hatred is as an impediment, as a block to the one who has all the power, I realize where the power is because I can invert that into a spiritual principle, remembering that it's a spiritual moral approach to addiction. So instead of hatred, it's acceptance, forgiveness, and then eventually unconditional love. Now, there's a lot of power in embodying those spiritual principles and applying that to my family, to my friends, when I'm in the rooms, when I'm working with clients. There's power in that approach. And that's the magic of 4 and 5. Now, here's another paradox. My resume is this, resentful, selfish, self-seeking, hateful, bigoted, misogynistic, vilifying, misanthropic, ugly individual. That's my resume as an untreated addict. And yet God hires me to do his job, to do his work. That's a paradox. God hires people with the worst resumes to do his good works. Now, if all we needed to know, and this brings us to the nut of today's discussion, 6 and 7, if all I needed to know was my column 4, what blocks me from God, and my column 5, what gives me access to God, we'd only have 5 steps. But behavioral modification, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, which are all kind of elements of a 12-step program, but it's not the program. They do not work for me. They will not produce the profound alteration in my reaction to life, to waking up to a power far greater than me, far greater than the alcohol, far greater than the drugs. I need a spiritual intervention. So 6 and 7 is where I get right with God. And then, of course, once I understand what that looks like, then I can apply that to the damage that I've done in my past. And 8 and 9 is when I get right for others, and that rockets me into the 4th dimension. And 10 and 11 are the daily disciplines of what I need to do to live life without booze and drugs. And of course, step 12, carrying the message to the addict that still suffers. Now, 6 and 7, the dynamic of 6 and 7, and it's very deceiving in our big book because it's only like a paragraph of text, right? The step 6 and the 7 step prayer. So it's very deceiving on what's really going on in this process. Now, in step 6, I get entirely ready to have God remove these character defects, right? What does it mean to be entirely ready? Well, in our step 4 instruction, it says, we begin to see the futility and the fatality of that 4th column, of those character defects. And we commence to see their terrible destructiveness. If I've done my step 4 and 5 thoroughly and really examined the resentments that have destroyed my life and the life of others, and the harms that I've done to others, and the fears that are driving me, I get a real visceral gut level hit of how futile, fatal, and destructive those character defects are. There's nothing good coming out of it. Now, the caveat is I will argue for certain character defects. There are days when I'll argue for hatred. And God always says, well, let's try it your way, Cameron. Which nothing good ever really works out of it. You know, there's a caveat that if I argue for my character defects, congratulations, I get to keep them. So I do inventories on a regular basis because it's kind of like rubbing my nose in my own shit. Bad Cameron, right? That's what it's like for me to do, and that's why I do inventories all the time. And here's another paradox. You can't do an inventory unless you're in God's world. The very act of putting pen to paper requires you to be honest. It requires you to be responsible and accountable. It requires you to have humility and to know the truth about who you are. It literally puts us into the spiritual realm. And I need to be there because that's where the power is. And lack of power, that's my dilemma. So step 6, if I've really done the 4 and 5 correctly, I see that futility, fatality, and destructiveness, and I am entirely ready to have God remove these character defects. I would say God drives a garbage truck. He backs it up, and I throw my defects in the back, and he drives off with them, and they vanish like a fart in the wind. That's ideally what's happening, right? But as I said, that there will be defects I'll argue with. If we still cling to something, we'll not let go. We ask God to give us the strength and the direction and the wherewithal to let them go. And I do that in a day. Oh God, please separate me from this anger and hatred. Take it away, root and branch. And allow me to do your will at this moment. Usually when I pray like that, things start to happen. Step 7 is humbly ask God to remove those shortcomings. Now, my good friend Anthony B. sent me 2 really good quotes out of the New Testament on step 7. Matthew 23:12 says, those who humble themselves are soon exalted, and those who exalt themselves are soon humbled. Step 7's got that dynamic in play. And then Proverbs 11:12 says, when pride comes, disgrace follows. And when humility comes, wisdom follows. So I want to get right with God, and we're given that wonderful step 7 prayer. And I start my day with step 3. I wake up to the notion I'm going to do God's will, being cognizant of what God's will is in my day, what the bondage of Cameron looks like, and what God's will look like in my activities and relationships and so forth, and execute my day. And then at the end of the day, I review my day, what went well, what didn't go so well, and I use my step 7 prayer in closing with conscious contact with God as I prepare to go sleep for the night. And I review my day, and I recognize what character defects have popped up, and I ask God to remove them, and then I ask God for the power and the strength and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be. And this is what I do every day, 3 in the morning, 7 at night. So my day is nicely framed in an awakened consciousness with the divine. Now that's easier said than done. It does require strenuous, vigorous work. Now, I'm going to demonstrate step 7. This is something I do with my prospects, and I've been doing it as an instruction in the 12 Steps 4 Hours workshop. And I'm going to do it with Purdy to show you an interesting way of doing step 7 with your prospect, and it creates a really powerful dynamic. Now, in our big book on 164, it says, admit your faults to God and your fellows. And, the sharing of our defects with one another, which we do in step 5 also, comes from the book of James. It's James 5:16. It says, confess your sins to each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. So I took that to heart, and I thought I'm going to actually create this kind of a dynamic with the people that I lead through the 12 steps. So Purdy and I are going to demonstrate how this step 7 works. I do it, of course, introspectively at the end of my day, but when I'm working with someone through the steps, I do it in this manner. So are you ready, Purdy?
Ready, Cam.
Okay, so Purdy, you can repeat after me, and then once I'm done with you, we can reverse the role and you can take me through it, okay? Okay, so repeat after me, my Creator,
My Creator,
I am now willing
I am now willing
that you should have all of me,
that you should have all of me,
good and bad.
good and bad.
I pray that you now remove from me
I pray that you now remove from me
every single defect of character.
every single defect of character.
God, please remove my
God, please remove my self-loathing, criticizing everything I do. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. It keeps me absolutely drenched in myself. It blocks me, you know. I'm always feeling less than. Remove my distrust. Everyone's going to hurt me. Everyone's going to let me down. Please remove my selfishness. I'm not considering others. I'm driven on what I want or what I think I need. Remove my dishonesty and my lying, you know, my fabrication of the truth to get what I want. To get, you know, to get out of it what I've done wrong. You know, this fabrication of the truth, this lust, this connection, this stuff that I just crave, you know. The need to be wanted, I suppose it comes from God. Driven by probably abandonment, you know, my need for closeness. Please, God, remove my anger, acting out on emotions, fits of rage because of my frustration, retaliating with absolutely no pause whatsoever. Remove my loneliness, my fear of being alone, not being loved. Take them all, God, as it stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows.
grant me strength.
God, grant me strength. God, strengthen my humility. I'm no more than, I'm no less than. Help me to trust, have faith and confidence in myself and others, in you, God. I want to be there for people. I don't want to judge other people. Please strengthen my unselfishness, putting others before myself, to have a generosity of spirit. Strengthen my integrity and my honesty. Help me to live in the light, in the truth. Strengthen my love our greatest energy. I want to be connected. I want connection. I want patience. God, help me to be considerate and accepting. Strengthen my faith and my courage and keep me moving forward in growth and in spirituality.
As I go out from here
As I go out from here
to do your bidding.
to do your bidding.
Amen. Okay, let's reverse
Amen.
the role.
Thank you, brother. My Creator,
My Creator,
I am now willing
I am now willing
that you should have all of me,
that you should have all of me,
good and bad.
good and bad.
I pray that you now remove from me
I pray that you now remove from me
every single defect of character.
every single defect of character.
God, please remove my
God, please remove my arrogance, my bigotry, my misogyny, my rudeness to others. Remove my suspicion, my selfishness, my self-seeking, especially my self-seeking motives for to be the center of attention, to have validation from others, approval from others, recognition. God, please remove my dishonest, lying, exaggerating ways, my intolerance and inconsiderations, my lust, my hatred, my procrastination, my impatience. God, please remove my fears of rejection, of no control, of institutional authority, of not being worthy or lovable or unacceptable, my fear of being invisible and forgotten. God, remove my irresponsible ways of blaming others, enabling, martyring myself, bullying. Please remove my vulgar talk and immoral thinking, my vilification of others, my sarcasm, my cynicism, taking pleasure in another person's misfortune, my indiscretions, my misanthropy, my prejudices, and lastly, God, please remove my unfair biases.
as it stands in the way
As it stands in the way
of my usefulness to you and my fellows.
of my usefulness to you and my fellows.
God, strengthen my
God, strengthen my humility. God, give me the strength to know who I am, to know my strengths, to know my weaknesses. Give me the strength to be respectful and courteous and polite to others, to trust my senses, to be content and grateful for all that you provide in my life, to be unselfish, to be helpful to others. God, give me the strength to validate others, recognize others, make others the center of my attention. Grant me honesty, integrity, and the ability to make restitution when required, to be tolerant, accepting, and tactful, to be generous, to be intimate, to be forgiving and loving, to take promptness in my life, to be forgiving and loving, to be patient, to have faith in your divine wisdom, your divine power, and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be a responsible man, to be responsible for my thoughts, my feelings, my behavior, so I can be responsible to others, to be a good parent, to be a good spouse, to be a trusted servant, to be a good employer, to be a good citizen of my community. Give me the responsibility and the accountability to be an independent and autonomous person so that I can be interdependent in my relationships with others, to have purity and kindness, to praise the good in others, to have levity, wisdom, to be empathetic and compassionate, to be discreet, devoted to humanity, to be fair, and lastly, God, give me the courage to be just.
As I go out from here.
As I go out from here.
To do your bidding.
To do your bidding. Amen. Amen. Now, just to top it all off on the 6-7 discussion, let us all take step 7 together. I have a step 7 prayer and meditation. So if you want to sit in an upright position, open your hands to receive, straighten your spine to stimulate that energy. And let us take the step 7 quietly together in this meditation. If you like this meditation, you can download it off the 12steps4hours.org website. So here we go.
Abandon yourself to God as you will understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find, and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding.
And with this newfound power flowing in, I can then get right with others, clean up the wreckage of my past so that I can be rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence in this spiritual world, and to stay awake and to grow in effectiveness and understanding, to live a life without booze or drugs in it any longer. And having had this spiritual awakening, I carry the message. I carry the message of our big book recipe to those who still suffer and seek a way out of that seemingly inescapable hole, inescapable hole we find ourselves, that seemingly state of hopeless mind and body experience. We show them a way out. And lastly, to practice these principles in all our affairs. And I'm for that. How about you? God bless. See you on the firing lines of recovery.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you for your share. You was heard. Appreciate you. I'm grateful you're here. Let's all take a moment, please. My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out here to do your bidding. Amen. I'd like to hand the meeting back to Cam to take us out with a prayer or reading of your choice, Cameron.
Oh, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
You know, there's a lot of power in the serenity prayer, especially the we version, because it signifies what we do together that we don't do alone. But what's amazing about this prayer is that we ask, that we're given the wisdom and the insight to accept the things we cannot change. Well, what are those things? Anything outside ourselves. And our friends in Al-Anon and Coda can certainly elaborate on that problem. And the courage to change things we can. And what our program tells us is that we always look within. What can I change within myself in relation to the world about me? And that's the power of the prayer and the meditation that goes with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. So let us take that moment now. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God bless. Thank you.